It's a light day for news in general so far. I say so far because news seems to just hit out of nowhere, like the Heinz firing, right? So, a couple of fines to talk about this morning, which I'm suspicious of, only because, okay, so the Johansen one's 5 grand. Okay. Kane got a 5 grand fine. Chernak, there's been nothing. No announcement at all. And there's been some talk on Twitter about, well, why didn't Chernak get anything? Especially since he just came back from a suspension. So, I don't know. A $5,000 fine really does nothing to these guys that make millions and millions and millions of dollars. Johansson gets, what, $8 million? Kane is I think 7.5 or 8 million under the cap, like 5 grand. It's a slap on the wrist, not even. So yeah, and then Chernak nothing. It's weird. Um, and I had been actually pretty strong in my support of the way the NHL was doing their due diligence with their discipline until the Bortuzzo one. The Bortuzzo one, it just seems like everything's kind of gone back to spin the wheel, see where it lands. Oh, look, you get a fine. Congratulations. Oh, you get 4 games for that. But I did the same thing. Shut up. How does that sound? All right. Winnipeg Jets this morning claimed Nick Shore from the Toronto Maple Leafs. So Shore does not clear waivers. There goes a little bit of depth from the Toronto Maple Leafs. I say a little bit because you can replace Nick Shore. There are other players with the Marlies right now who Toronto could definitely use as a call-up, who would be able to do what Nick Shore does. But for Winnipeg, it's a free pickup. It's a guy on a league minimum contract, and he can play fourth line minutes for the Winnipeg Jets. So Shore moves to yet another team, and we'll see how much he plays with Winnipeg, how long he stays in Winnipeg, this kind of stuff. So yeah, Winnipeg picks up another player. Akeem Aliu met with the NHL yesterday, and as expected, fans have just been universal in their belief that everything we just need to make everything. No, of course not. Now here's where it's the thing. So Akeem Aliu was a player who was known for having an attitude problem when he played. That was a known thing, and it followed him through multiple organizations. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's 100% wrong in a lot of things that he's talked about. So that's where we're at. So the NHL wanting to do the right thing, and here's why from an NHL standpoint. There is already a perception that it is a sport that is kind of vanilla, kind of a mayonnaise kind of color to it, and that's not true. But the perception's out there, so they're going to meet with him, and they're talking to him about some sort of a partnership kind of thing. I've seen the Kaepernick comparisons. It's not comparable. Kaepernick's really alienated a lot of people along the way, and that whatever that fight was about initially, and I get what that fight was about initially, but it just seems like it's just morphed into being more about Kaepernick than about anything else. So this is something different. This is absolutely something different. And I think the one thing that they talked about making a change with is the idea that a player should feel safe coming forward with information, which is not something that's in hockey. This whole culture of silence and just shut your mouth, that is absolutely 100% a part of hockey and sports in general. The idea is something happens, well, toughen up, be a man, shut up. And so that's something, and it's about everything. So it'll be interesting to see how the NHL does this. Again, I talked about this earlier, the idea that, and credit to Sheldon Kennedy on this, their workplaces, treat them like workplaces, have the same kind of structure with a hockey team that you would if it was any other business. These guys make millions and millions of dollars. The businesses are usually worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Treat it like a workplace and have all of the same policies. And I've seen people say, well, you're allowed to punch people. What kind of workplace is that? Yeah, but if we talk about taking the punching out of the game, then people throw their arms up in the air even more, even though punching and fighting is way down off where it was. And I have to say that I did that video yesterday on the changing face of the game, and people saying, hey, you're trying to say players weren't tough before the 70s. No, not at all. I was trying to say this brawling, fighting all the time kind of hockey wasn't a thing, and that we had a game that was different before the Broad Street Bullies era. I've never said anything about players being tough, because right now when you look at the NHL, players are bigger than they've ever been. They are stronger than they've ever been. They're in better shape than they've ever been. Faster. They shoot the puck harder. Part of that is due to the fact that they have the brand new sticks that everybody can shoot at 90 miles an hour. It is a much faster skill game, but when I see people saying, oh, players aren't tough like they used to be, yeah, they are. It's the idea that you don't have to throw fists to prove toughness anymore. That's not a part of the game. Used to be. I'm old enough to remember when you'd see a guy come up to the NHL and you would hear that comment. Well, we'll see if he's tough when he's in a fight. Yeah, he hasn't been in a fight yet, though. We don't really hear that anymore. So, unless it's a game that involves Matt Tkachuk and Drew Doughty coming this Saturday, we don't have any guaranteed fights on the schedule. So, what's going on here is it's a continuing the evolution of the game. Edler's out a minimum of 2 weeks with an upper body injury for the Vancouver Canucks, because every year he has to have an injury. This is just standard. So far, so good for the Vancouver Canucks. They haven't looked like they're in dire straits without him. Fantenberg had a goal last night, which is a good sign. I think Fantenberg's been good. The funny thing is, I believe it was Ian McIntyre who was talking to somebody in Canucks management and said, well, how do you feel about Fantenberg? And they said, we like Fantenberg. And he said, well, have you told him? Because you haven't played him in a single game yet this year. And that was before the Edler injury, since the Edler injury has been on the roster. But yeah, he wasn't getting into any games at all. None. And that's got to be tough as a player to stay focused when you're getting absolutely no ice time in an actual game situation. It has to be a very difficult situation. So that's why I tend to talk a lot about journeyman players. And I have an admiration for guys who go through that, because it's easier, I would think, to get motivated if you're making $8 million. You get first line minutes. You're kind of guaranteed your ice time because you're a big star. And for the guys who are making league minimum, which is still good money, but maybe you're not playing, then you're thrown into a game after 3 weeks of not playing. And if you don't have a very good game, you might not play for another 2 months. You might get waived down to the minors. You might go from a salary of $700,000 to $50,000 because of that one game. So I have a great fondness for players who are on the fringes and maybe don't get any media attention. So that's why I make some of the videos that I do on some of the careers that I do. Gabriel Landeskog could return to the lineup tomorrow for the Colorado Avalanche. That's good news. They've missed him, and yet their record has been excellent without him. And it's been excellent without players. Colorado, St. Louis, Pittsburgh, I'm thinking are the three teams that have been most ravaged by injuries this year. And yet all three look like playoff teams, which is bad news for the rest of the National Hockey League. Because, again, once these teams get healthy, look out. When you put together the Landeskog, Rantanen, McKinnon line, based on the idea that those guys end up back together, Donskoy's made an argument that maybe he could stay on that line. Maybe you split those threes, get those three guys up so you can have two good scoring lines going. But for Colorado, there's some depth there this year that wasn't necessarily there last year. And it's funny, I do a lot of searching around online, and I find a lot of old articles. And I found articles about the Nazem Kadri trade, which made it sound like Colorado made a huge mistake and trading Barrie for Kadri, and what are they thinking? On top of that, when I was doing a Connor Hellebuck search today, I thought it was funny. I actually found articles about how Hellebuck may not be a starter, and the Jets may want to, look for a solution and or somebody else to take over for Hellebuck. They're not articles from this year, but when you Google search a hockey player, you're going to find that almost any player, there's talk about them slumping. Maybe you should trade them. Maybe they should go. I'm trying to think of which one it was I was searching, and it said, obviously, they need to trade the player. I can't remember. I think there was a Landeskog article I saw from years ago that was, Landeskog's not working. He needs to be traded. They're funny. And at some point, I may put together a video where we discuss all of these opinions and articles. It's part of the reason why I try not to get too down on a player when they're struggling, because I think some of the overly reactionary videos, articles, and stuff that people do, I think that'll come back on you later, where it's like, wait, what? So I will react to a trade, but in general, if a player's slumping, I don't say, oh yeah, no, that guy needs to go. Good example of that is Jake Allen in St. Louis, where I was like, all right, well, if they could get something for him during the past summer, fine, but right now, yeah, there's no reason to trade him. And the last thing I want to talk about is something that's coming soon to an arena near you. So it started with St. Louis. St. Louis was the first team to do this, where you have betting inside the arena. And you can bet on anything. You can bet on who's going to get the first 3 shots of the game, how many saves a goalie's going to make in the game, who's going to score goals. And when player and puck tracking shows up, that's supposed to happen at some point this season. I haven't heard anything about it. Batman will certainly be front and center when that becomes a thing, because the NHL is going to make big money off gambling in games. Now, the funny thing is that this is going to lead to a bunch of gambling. There's a B in that, so I need to fix that while I'm looking at it, because that'll just drive me nuts. As it'll drive people nuts, they'll be making comments before I fix it, right? I have to say something, because Shannon's got that wrong on the board. It's going to drive me crazy. So there's going to be a lot of in-game gambling. Here's where it's weird. So we didn't put a team in Vegas. The NHL didn't. And the NHL wanted to make it clear this was not a pro-gambling thing, and that, you know, gambling rules weren't changing. And now gambling rules are changing in relation to National Hockey League teams. I find it weird that the National Hockey League, that was very seemingly vocal in the, we don't want to get into that gambling. That's the seedy side of things. Now, only a few years later, oh, we can make the money on the gambling? We like the gambling. And that seems to be what it is. That it went from, instead of, casinos, bookies, and all these people making money off the gambling. Now, oh, if we can make the money, oh, sure, we'll do the gambling. It's a slippery slope, though, isn't it? Because when is that going to happen, where we find out that a player between the first and second intermission was gambling on themselves? When are we going to find out? And we've seen it, Pete Rose, where guys will gamble potentially on their own team. And so, yeah, gambling in sports, I understand that's hugely intertwined and related now. I think it's a whole Pandora's box being opened with that one. So, we'll see what ends up happening with that, and how soon you can gamble as much as you want during the game from an app handed to you by the team, where they're like, hey, we know you spent $200 to have your seat here. We know you spent $10 on that beer and $8 on that hot dog. Maybe $15 if you wanted some condiments on it. We understand, too, that those fries were $25. To make it up to you, why don't you give us another $50 to gamble on things that are going to happen in the game? So maybe you'll win 20 back, something like that. Because they don't make enough money, I guess. It's an interesting time we live in. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as I know you will. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.